Welcome, folks, to Lesson 3 in our study in the book of Daniel as a part of the prophecy series. Now, in our last lesson, we looked at chapter 1, which focused on Daniel and his friends coming into service of the king, and first of all, their determination not to be defiled by Babylonian food, but being devoted to God, God giving them wisdom and understanding, and also giving Daniel the ability to understand dreams and visions. So this is very important as we get into chapter 2 today, because immediately, even though it's an historical narrative, it is a prophetic passage, because what we're going to look at today is Nebuchadnezzar's first dream. And we're going to see that in Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 49. So when we look at this text, we're going to start seeing a little bit about Nebuchadnezzar's megalomaniac, basically narcissistic attitude that he has, but we're also going to see how Daniel approaches his service. So in verses 1 through 16 of chapter 2, we see the king's nightmare. So the king has some dreams that trouble him. So here is what the text says. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with a certainty that you're trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who could meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed. They sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. So let's take a look at this. This is quite a wild passage when you think about what Nebuchadnezzar is asking and you see the response of Daniel. So let's talk about his dreams. They're mentioned, first of all, the king's dreams in chapter 2, verse 1. So the dreams occurred in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So in the second year of his reign, he has these dreams. He had a reoccurring dream that caused him not to sleep. Basically, he had some sort of a dream that was basically a nightmare. You and I understand nightmares. It's a terrible dream that happens where it leaves us sleepless. It causes us great distress. This is what the king is happening here. So, of course, in a culture where dreams have significance, as they do even to this day in the Middle East, the king wants to know the meaning. So we're going to see that in chapter 2, verses 2 through 11, the meaning of the dream is sought, which, by the way, is not unusual for anybody to try to understand their dreams. That even happens today. So the king summoned his wise men into his presence to interpret his dream. Now, this would be a normal thing for the wise men. The king has a dream, he comes in, he tells him the dream, he gets an interpretation, or he gets a basic understanding of what's going on. That's the kind of thing that they normally did as a part of their duties. However, what we see here is that this is a little bit unusual. Why? Well, the king stated that he was anxious to know the meaning of the dream. So obviously, he was traumatized by this dream. Obviously, this dream left him unsettled, and so now he definitely wants to know, what is the meaning? I'm anxious about knowing the meaning. So the wise men requested that the king tell them what he had dreamed. So again, they're just assuming this is part of their normal duties. Okay, king, we understand you want to know the dream and what it means. So why don't you just tell us? Tell us the dream. We'll talk among ourselves and we'll give you an interpretation. But this is where it goes sideways. This is where the king makes an unusual request that is not normal. What do you mean? Well, the king demanded that they tell him what he dreamed and its interpretation. Now, do you see here? Nebuchadnezzar is deciding, okay, if you're that great and you can understand what my dream is, well, hey, all right, guys, tell me what the dream is and then the interpretation. Then I'll understand. Now, there could be various reasons why Nebuchadnezzar's in this position. He maybe thinks that what they're saying is fluff and could mean anything, and so therefore he's going to test them, and he wants to know that they really know what the interpretation is because they know what the dream is, even though he hasn't said anything. So he's demanding, hey, you tell me what my dream is, and then you tell me the interpretation. Now, if you're the wise men, you've got to be exasperated by this point. And here's what it's happening. So the king stated that they would be executed if they could not do this. If you can't do this, I'm going to kill you. And basically, the text describes how horrible the death. I'll tear you from limb. But it isn't just going to be on you, it's going to be on your families, and tear your households down. Basically, their families would be destroyed. The king stated that there was a great reward for the one who could tell him. Well, obviously so, because nobody can have this ability. And so the king is saying, if you can do this, I'm going to give you a great reward. So again, but notice the reaction of these wise men, because this request from the king is not normal. So the wise men requested again that the king tell them the dream. So basically, they're desperate. Okay, they're in a no-win situation here. They can't just give some fluff trying to imagine. I mean, they had books of dreams and books of interpretations of what certain things meant in a dream and so forth. So this isn't going to work where they have to tell the king the dream. So they're basically saying, okay, well, just tell us the dream and we'll give you the interpretation. Now, again, the king stated that they were stalling for time, and obviously so. Obviously so. They're not, by asking this, they're like, no way. They're not admitting we can't do it. They're basically saying, well, you just tell us and we'll tell you. They're stalling for time. So the king accused them of lying to him. Now, this accusation seems to be a little bit more than just with regards to this situation. It may reflect that Nebuchadnezzar was feeling like the advice or the interpretations that he was getting from these wise men were basically lies. And so here he says, you're lying to me. He accuses them. So he says, if they could tell him the dream, he will know that they have the interpretation. And that makes sense. If you can tell me my dream without me telling you it, then I know you've got the ability to give me the interpretation. So again, this would be very traumatizing to these wise men. They're asked to do something that they know that they cannot do. So here's what they do. The wise men stated that no man could do as the king requested. So basically they're saying, there isn't anybody that can do what you're asking. No one. They stated that only the gods could fulfill the king's request. And to be honest with you, in that instance, they're not lying. The reality is only gods, and we would say only one God, could give an understanding of what the dream was and its interpretation. So again, obviously, we're going to see that the king reacts to that. So when we come to chapter 2, verses 12 through 16, we see the king's anger. So the king was filled with anger and ordered the wise men killed. So it's only natural. These guys say they can't do it. They're saying there's nobody that can do it. So the king is mad at them. Probably has been mad before, but maybe that's his character. Maybe he's a reactionary, but he obviously reacts, and he basically commands not just the ones who are with him in the room trying to answer this, he commands all of them to be killed. The king's decree went out, and they started to kill the wise men. This is some kind of real despotic situation that you have going on here, where one man has the power of the sword, he makes a command, and they're just going out and killing anybody who is in the king's service as a wise man. Now, because of the decree, they sought to kill Daniel and his friends. Now remember, Daniel and his friends, when they appeared before the king in chapter 1, they entered into his service. And because they have wisdom and understanding, they are one of the wise men now in the Babylonian society, the Babylonian kingdom. And with this decree, they would be also being sought after to be killed. So here's what happens. Daniel asked the captain of the guard why the decree went out. So basically Daniel says, whoa, wait a minute, hold on. Why is this happening? Why are we being ordered to kill? Natural question. So of course, the guard tells them why. Of course, the text tells us that. And this results in Daniel asked the king for time so that he could tell the interpretation. So the implication is Daniel went to the king and says, "O king, give me time to understand the dream, to tell you the dream, and to get its interpretation." And obviously the king granted him that. So then that brings us to chapter 2, verses 17 to 23, where the dream is revealed to Daniel. The dream is revealed. So here's what verse 17 says. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, his companions. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong all wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Now, that brings us to where we see in verses 17 through 18 that when Daniel is told that the king is wanting to destroy the wise men, he's got to tell his friends. So we see Daniel's report to his friends in verses 17 through 18. So Daniel called his friends to pray for God's mercy for them. Now you notice the reaction. Immediately, what do? You go to God, ask for mercy. Natural response of anyone, should be the natural response of anyone in a dire situation, is to go to God and ask for mercy. When we come to chapter 2, verse 19, the first part, we see that the dream is revealed. So what we're going to see now is that when they're praying, the secret of the dream was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So obviously he went to sleep, but sometimes during the night, he has a night vision concerning the dream. It's revealed to him. Same dream. That's interesting, isn't it? Then when we come to chapter 2, verses 19, the second part, through verse 23, we see recorded in the text Daniel's praise. So what we see is that Daniel praises the Lord for the revelation of the dream and its interpretation. So Daniel praised God for revealing the dream and its interpretation. Immediate response to praise the Lord. Then when we come to chapter 2, verses 24 through 30, we see that Daniel appears before the king. So let's take a look and see what the text says. Let's start with verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, No wise man, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the vision of your head as you lay in the bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. So here's what we're going to see, folks. We're going to see this passage basically laid out in several sections. First of all, when he gets the vision and the interpretation, he's got to get to the king. So we see in verse 24 of chapter 2 the request to see the king. So Daniel went to the captain of the guard and requested to see the king. So he goes to the captain, the guy who's been assigned to kill all the wise men, and he says, I've got the dream, I've got the interpretation, bring me before the king. So then we get to chapter 2, verse 25, and we see the captain's report. Now, if you read the captain's report, he's basically trying to take credit here, isn't he, with what I found among the exiles of Judah, a guy who can do this. So the captain brought Daniel before the king. He announced Daniel's intention to reveal the dream. So he says, basically, I got a guy here, he can do it. He's trying to take credit because if Daniel's right. Now, that's a pretty scary thing. What if Daniel was wrong? That guy would probably lose his head as well because he brought somebody who couldn't do it. But he announces that Daniel has the ability to do this. So that brings us to chapter 2, verse 26, and we see the king's question. And what we see is that as he's being brought before the king, he says that this guy can bring the interpretation. Here's what happens. The king asks Daniel if he is able to reveal the dream and its interpretation. Natural question. Are you sure you can do this? Do you have the ability? So then we see in chapter 2, verse 27 through 30, we see Daniel's response. We see how he replies. So what happens is Daniel proclaims that the wise men could not reveal the secret of the dream. Now, if you look at this closely, you would be like, whoa, what a way to start out. He's basically saying the same thing that the wise men said earlier. There's no way that anybody could do that. And remember, the king got mad at that. But here's Daniel making the same proclamation. However, Daniel proclaims that there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. So rather than just stopping and saying that nobody can reveal this, Daniel diverts the attention to the God of heaven, the Supreme One, the Almighty, and says he is the one who reveals secrets. And that this God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So basically, Daniel is saying this dream that you had that bothered you, that you're wanting to know the meaning of, this is something from God himself that is going to reveal what's going to take place in the future. So basically, Daniel is saying this is a prophetic dream. So Daniel stated that the secret was not to reveal to him because of his wisdom. So typically what normal magicians or soothsayers or enchanters or Chaldeans would do, they would try to make themselves look good, and they would try to say, oh, look at how great I am, I figured this out on my own. Daniel is approaching this from a position of humility, and he's saying, look, I'm just going to tell you right up the bat, this secret wasn't revealed to me because I'm all wise. That's not the issue here. The secret was revealed for Daniel's sake and the king's understanding. Daniel's sake. What do you mean? Well, it was revealed so that Daniel and his friends wouldn't be killed. King's understanding, it's so that the king would understand what's coming in the future. That's why the secret was revealed. So that brings us to chapter 2, verse 31 to 35, where the text reveals us the dream. So let's focus on the dream. We see this starting in verse 31. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, with its legs of iron, its feet partially of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Wow, what a dream. All right, so let's talk about this. First of all, in chapter 2, verse 31, we see the awesome image. And so Daniel is going to describe to the king this dream. So Daniel tells the king that he saw a great image that was so splendid and awesome, as well as terrible. So he saw this great image. What is the makeup of the image? Well, we see that in chapter 2, verses 32 through 33. And what we see here is this, is that the image had a head of gold, a chest of silver, and thighs of bronze. So this great image is made up of the first part, the head is gold, the chest is silver, and then thighs of bronze. The image had legs of iron and the feet made of iron and clay mixture. Quite interesting, isn't it? What an image. Then when we get to verses 34 to 35 of chapter 2, we see the destruction of the image. There was a stone cut without human hands. So this is interesting. This is a point that he's trying to basically say cut without human hands is basically to say that someone made this stone and it wasn't human. The stone struck the feet of the image and broke it into pieces. The image was then crushed together and blown away as chaff, like the chaff from a threshing floor when they are in the grain harvest. It blows away as nothing in the wind. So the stone became a mountain that filled the whole earth. So the stone that struck the image then becomes this huge mountain that fills the whole earth. Well, that's the dream. What is the interpretation? So that brings us to chapter 2, verse 36 to 45, where we see now the interpretation. Here's what verse 36 says. This was the dream. Now we tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of men, the beasts of the field, the birds of heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. There shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron, it crushes. It shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partially of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay. And as the toes of the feet are partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. And just as you saw that stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. And the dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. All right, so let's talk about this interpretation. And what we're going to see here is a glimpse at the future from the Babylonian kingdom forward. Starts with chapter 2, verse 36, where we see the interpretation announced. So Daniel proclaims that he will tell the interpretation before the king. So when we look at the interpretation, it's broken into several parts with regards to the several parts of the image and the events that take place with the image. So the first part is the head of gold. We see that in Daniel chapter 2, verse 37 to 38. Daniel proclaims that Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom are the head of gold. Now, the second and third kingdom are presented in Daniel chapter 2, verse 39. After this, another inferior kingdom will arise, and another after it to rule the world. So if Nebuchadnezzar is the gold, that's the first kingdom. The Babylonians are the first kingdom. After the Babylonian kingdom, Daniel is saying that with this dream, another inferior kingdom will arise. And we know that to be the Medo-Persian Empire. And then after the Medo-Persian Empire, another kingdom will arise to rule the world. And that would be the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. And then that, of course, would be followed by a fourth kingdom. The fourth kingdom we see in chapter 2, verse 40. And when we look after this third kingdom, which I'm telling you is the Greek kingdom, a fourth kingdom will arise that is as strong as iron and crush all others. Now, we know from history that that fourth kingdom is the mighty Roman Empire. And it was a brutal kingdom. Now, then that brings us to the image, just doesn't stop there. It has feet of clay and iron. And we see this in Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 to 43. So basically, what we see here then is with regards to the fourth kingdom will be divided. Now, how that happens, I'm not sure, but we see that from history. The Roman Empire was divided. It will be both strong and fragile. And we see that through human history. Nothing has been like the Roman Empire again. All other empires or kingdoms or governments afterwards have been both strong and fragile. Different peoples will mix together in this kingdom that is coming, but they will not be united. Isn't that interesting? Even though they've got all these peoples in these kingdoms that are mixing together, they won't be united. Well, then that brings us to the final part of the vision, which is this stone. And it basically is God's kingdom, which we see in Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. And here's what Daniel reveals to us. So during the time of the divided kingdom, God will set up a kingdom. So during this time when there's this divided kingdom made up of clay and iron, that's firm but also fragile, peoples who mix together but are not united, in this time, God's going to set up a kingdom. This kingdom will never be destroyed and is not left to other people. See, with that final phrase there, not left to other people, you and I know that when armies conquer and then they take over, has been basically all of human history, where kingdoms are come and the kingdoms are destroyed, whatever's left is left for somebody else to take. He's basically saying that this kingdom is never going to be destroyed. This final kingdom, God's kingdom, is never going to be destroyed, and it's not going to be left because somebody else came along and took over. It will destroy other kingdoms and stand forever. So basically it's saying that all of these other kingdoms, from basically the Babylonian to the Medo-Persian to the Greek to the Roman, of course this final kingdom that we see there with the mixture of the clay and the iron, it will destroy all of these kingdoms, bring them all together, and nothing will stand again forever. I've illustrated this dream here with an image that I found that I think would illustrate what's going on. So if you'll notice, there is the head of gold, the Babylonian Empire, the breast of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, the thighs of bronze, the Greek Empire, and the legs of iron, that is the Roman Empire, and the feet of iron and clay, which is this future world government. And there you see the stone that comes, that has been made without human hands, that destroys the entire structure, the entire image. Now, when we get to chapter 2, verse 45, we're going to see the certainty of the dream. So Daniel tells the king that God has made known to him what will happen in the future. So again, he's reiterating this dream. Daniel is saying to the king, King, what you saw is what's going to take place in the future. And Daniel states that the dream and its interpretation are a fact. This is the bottom line. This is what's going to happen. So that brings us to verse 46 to 49, where the king fulfills his promise. He honors Daniel. Daniel is honored. Daniel honored. Here's what I want you to see. Look at what the text says. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, the revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. Now, let's take a look here. Verse 46 of chapter 2, we see the king's response. So the king responded by humbling himself and honoring Daniel. This would have been a big deal that the king would, who is the supreme ruler, the guy who has the power of the sword, would basically humble himself, and he honors Daniel. So the king makes a proclamation. We see that. The king's proclamation in chapter 2, verse 47. So with that, the king's going to tell what needs to happen. So the king proclaimed that God is the true God since he revealed this secret. Now, let me stop there because you might be inclined now to think that Nebuchadnezzar becomes a believer in Yahweh, that he has become a believer in the God of the universe. Well, in a sense he has, but in a sense he hasn't. Let me remind you that the Babylonians, as well as those of the other nations around, were polytheistic. They would still worship their God, but now they recognize that Yahweh, the God of the Jews, is a significant figure, and so that's what he's proclaiming here. It is not a profession that he has become a follower of Yahweh. He is just recognizing that God, the God of the Jews, is a true God, since he has revealed the secret of the dream. Now, verse 48 through 49 reveal the whole issue of what happens with Daniel and his friends, as Daniel and his friends are promoted. So what we see then is Daniel was promoted to ruler over the province of Babylon. Wow, what a significant thing to happen. So because of this, he's given the top job. Daniel's friends were set over the affairs of Babylon. So now his friends, they're given chief positions over the province of Babylon. And that brings us to the end of chapter 2. And that brings us to the end of chapter 2 as we see what happens with Daniel's friends. But that sets us up for chapter 3, which we're going to look at in lesson 4.